Three, two, one. And welcome to the next episode of Smooth Brains. No. Start again.
No, that's perfect. Smooth thoughts.
Start.
That was more perfect than you could have hoped for. That was perfect.
I had a line I wanted to use. I'll use it on episode 3.
Okay, so I think we're just going to jump into it now this time.
Yes, I'm your host, Chimp, and this is John, and we have a lot of talking to do. So let's get started right away. What is on the menu for today?
Okay. So I want to introduce Donald Hoffman, which there's plenty of him on the internet. He's got a TED Talk. He's got many interviews. He's a very well-respected artificial intelligence, evolutionary psychology, and a game theory scholar, researcher, professors, everything. So yeah, he's the smart one. I'm gonna put a video in the description for anybody that wants to go like on a rabbit hole on his stuff. But I kind of want to just bring his sort of like ideas forward and then like talk about them and see like so he does evolutionary biology simulations on the computer. He's done thousands of them, and try to boil this down to like the basic points that his conclusions and all of it. Big one being, the better you are at evolution, the further away from quote unquote reality you stray, which, the rules to which they define what the reality is. I guess you can say that's pretty arbitrary, but, the best analogy is a video game, like Grand Theft Auto, where, you're playing Grand Theft Auto and the game is designed to give you just enough sensation to understand what's happening, which is that you are a criminal, you're driving a car, there's all this like insane shit happening. But the truth is it's an Xbox or a PlayStation, there's a circuit board, and that would be what the reality there is. And so, everybody's heard simulation theory and everything. The interesting thing about Donald Hoffman's work is that he's really sort of turned it into a formula of trying to measure the consequences of fitness payoffs in evolution and how it affects your perception of reality, being that you see less of reality the better you are at surviving. So to make it short, the implication there is that we have evolved to be the most successful organism on this planet, not because we see reality for what it is, but because we've managed and we're able to develop a sensory perceptual system for ourselves that hides reality better than any other organism. So we are the furthest from what is quote unquote real, but of course the nuances to all of that get real deep. But so it's commentary on materialism, which scientifically speaking, materialism has been the standard for hundreds and hundreds of years. We're trying to figure out how inert matter becomes complex enough to develop consciousness. So Hoffman's work tries to flip that around, and you say, well, maybe consciousness is the thing that's already there, and through different degrees of complexity, you have different windows into different kinds of consciousnesses. So when I talk to you, I see Chimp, and I'm communicating with you. And so
hello.
The theory kind of, is to suggest that it's almost like we're creating the world for ourselves, but, it is saying that there is a consciousness, which is Chimp, but my idea that your body is what your consciousness is totally off. That's just a perceptual modality that helps us stay alive. And that window to your consciousness presumably has some sort of link to the real or the reality that is inaccessible to us almost completely. And I mean, there's plenty of implications, but that's the general idea, and I hope I got that across well enough. Do you have any initial thoughts on that?
One question.
Mm-hmm.
Do I exist?
Um,
Because you're saying that what you see isn't real, but what you see is me. So do I exist?
right. So that was what I was kind of like saying, is that there is a consciousness, which is chimp.
Ah, okay.
And that consciousness is sort of like existing in a place that I actually don't know.
So I do exist. So we're two conscious, as he calls it, conscious agents interacting.
Right. So that's his whole theory, is the conscious agent theory. If anybody wants to look that up, conscious agent theory, he tries to set parameters and define what a conscious agent is and how it might behave in an evolutionary environment.
And then everything else is not real.
Okay, so the thing is, there is no boundary to where you can find a conscious agent. So, there's animals, and we have definitely an intuition about their consciousness and their communication with us. And then, so, when you get to the point of inanimate objects, there's an argument to be made that whatever consciousness the inanimate object might be, whatever modality that it's in, is irrelevant to us to the degree to which that we decide it's an inanimate object.
Gotcha. So it's not necessarily back to the whole thing with our reality, our body fine tunes realities to make it so we excel at evolution, getting these fitness payoff, right? So rocks don't really have anything to do with that.
We can't eat them, but we can throw them.
Exactly. So it's not like food, like you're saying, like something you need food. It's not like sex. It's not like these things that we immediately need. Or
What's interesting is it kind of, I just thought most of the stuff we eat is stuff that's alive. So funny idea to be that, our sensory modalities maybe kind of decided that the things that we can consume are alive things. We perceive them as alive.
but they're also conscious agents, right?
Absolutely, yeah, living things.
So then is it like conscious agent cannibalism, CAC?
Okay, so
That's a good branding.
another interesting aspect to the whole thing is that conscious agents, you can have many of them. Mathematically speaking, this is kind of his framework. You can have many of them and group them, and that can be one conscious agent. And conversely, you can have a conscious agent and divide it, I think, infinitely.
From what I understood, I only watched that one video, but it seems like what he was saying was your body, like exactly what you're saying. Like there's, I would assume that your cells themselves have their like these conscious agents, but they're just on a different level than what we are. But all these different things work together, experiencing stuff, and then it's brought up to this level of conscious agents, which is, me, Chimp, you, John. And he made a small allusion to machine. Okay, so computers, right? Like people program stuff into computer. Like they write programs to Grand Theft Auto or audio recording thing, but they're not actually writing in computer language. Computer language is 101011. Computers don't understand. Hello, this is John. So there's machine language. And then there's higher level programming languages like Python and stuff like that. Like that. What I'm trying to say is that that machine language, I feel, is our cells. Like they communicate on that like internal level, whether it's through electrical means, whether it's through chemical means. I don't know. I have no idea how they communicate. And they eventually compile all that data, all that whatever, that code, and translate it up to our brain, which is like this like higher level programming language that we understand.
Yeah, that's really funny because it's one of those tangents that I'm not going to try to like go too far into. But another topic from another of these researchers has to do with sort of the way in which organisms are these swarms of cells, and the cells kind of have their role, and they play it. And then, yeah, so the organism is made up of the cell swarm of each of those, like, systems. There's systems within systems. You know, you arbitrarily decided the cell to be the building block, but you could go down to DNA.
Yeah, exactly.
You could go up
DNA.
to organs. And the conscious agent framework kind of allows for all of that, because it just says that, you know, one conscious agent will be made up of subconscious agents, and those subconscious agents will be made up of further subconscious agents, and you can go up and you can go in and out as far as you want.
But just to finish the analogy, so if, let's say, that Xbox is just like a person, or like instead of cells, it's, you know, it's electrical signals between capacitors and resistors and everything, and then they all come together to make the game, like the actual visuals you see, and that would really be us. Like, so we see what we think is reality, but in the end, it's really just an illusion.
Right. It's like one elaborate illusion when you're playing the video game, especially like a VR game. But Grand Theft Auto, I feel like, is a good example, because Grand Theft Auto is one of those games where it gives you a sensory experience, right? Like you're stealing cars and you're shooting cops and you're doing all these things that, you know, for whatever reason, people are able to sort of, like, you know, be in the shoe of the video game and put themselves in the shoes of another person. That's a whole other episode. But like, we're really good at doing that. So we're playing Grand Theft Auto and we're like the character and we're like doing all this crazy shit, and it gives us that stimulation. And we know that it's just a game, because it's obvious, because it's just a screen. You know, now that we're getting good VR, maybe it's a little more, you know, a little bit more convincing, but we know Grand Theft Auto is just a game. We still get a little bit of sensation from that, and that's the perceptual sort of like trick that it's playing. But we know that we're not actually like shooting somebody. It's literally just a blip on a circuit board. But, you know, our entire evolutionary thing we've been gifted with kind of at least gives us some sense of satisfaction that we were able to see it happen and kind of know that we did it. But so the video game analogy is a really good one here. And so, of course, the question is like, all right, well, if this is like some sort of just, you know, evolutionary field of icons that are being projected, like, by what? And the idea is that you're projecting it onto yourself, you know, like, you know, basically my senses have evolved, because everybody, I feel like there's always the simulation thing, and it's like, well, who made the simulation, and who knows?
Well, yeah, that's be the question. Well, if this is all designed to be a video game, then who is the designer?
Right. I mean, I've been, you know, saying, well, evolution has kind of created this self-simulated perceptual modality. So like, you're kind of constructing the simulation for yourself because like you're hungry or whatever. But you know, if you go behind the curtain, who knows really what's going to be found there. The truth is that like it's we're far from understanding very much at all about what might be behind that curtain of the software. I guess you can say that in the analogy, we would be the software sensory projection we experience.
Yeah.
And then the hardware, probably not that interesting, right? You know, a circuit board is not nearly as interesting as playing the Grand Theft Auto. So the hardware is probably not that interesting, but of course the benefit of that is cheat codes. You know, so that's you know, even though cheat codes kind of suck the almost like the meaning of the game, which is an interesting thought, right? It's like
sometimes it's fun being in God mode, though. You just turn on
it is,
God mode.
yeah.
You're just like kicking ass. Tired of losing. Fuck this.
Actually, no, you're right. God mode is really fun, which is why the idea. I mean, basically, like, you know, he's built the mathematical framework for it, and doesn't seem like I've seen anybody really refute it to the degree where anybody's been able to sort of like make any like counter proof so far as to what he's claiming, but which is not that much, you know. It's simply just that the simple idea of materialism is being called into question.
Well, I mean, and he said it himself, like, these ideas they're not necessarily new.
Right. Yeah.
These are old, like, as far back as human history probably goes, we've been always trying to figure out, like, what is life? What is the meaning in life? What are we? Why are we? Why are we here? And it's hard to answer, like science really can't answer those questions, because science is more about, like, what this is rather than why it is. Yeah. Or, you know, it's good at describing stuff, but it doesn't necessarily explain the meaning of, like, how a baby is actually, how consciousness is born, or how this and that, like, you know, or like, why am I here? Like, why am I sad? Why am I happy? Like, we can't explain those things. Yeah,
we learn a lot, but science really, really has not done much for the subjective experience.
But that's exactly why, because it's science is for the most part objective, and it does take subjective stuff into account, but you can't necessarily measure subjective stuff. So it's through a traditional scientific framework you can't, and so that's, I guess, why I feel like this is worth episode 2, because it feels like such a good ground for an entire new sort of way of asking questions. Gotcha.
Not starting from the materialism, which has absolutely no like way of talking about subjectivity. Flipping it on its head, now we're, you know, kind of considering this a space of subjectivity, and matter something that subjectivity makes for itself, for whatever reason, which of course that is up in the air, but exactly, flipping that around, right? Is we've been doing the other thing for so long. It's like trying to find a way to talk about, describe, measure subjectivity by starting from the materialistic framework, which I've guessed mostly because it's the only thing we could prove, quotes, you know. Science is pretty young, and, you know, the materialistic viewpoint is far easier to make a theory and then find evidence for it, and then try to establish an entire sort of like worldview that way. Whereas starting from subjectivity is already requiring some of the, you know, very most like cutting edge kind of math and computation stuff that's going on, which is, you know, I'm really looking forward to like where it goes and where other people take it. But I just think that it's been it's like too sophisticated to have been able to have been scientifically approached yet.
Well, he did specifically mention that his team, because it's not just Dr. Hoffman, but he has a team of mathematicians and this and that who are working together. And he specifically mentioned that they're working and they're learning this new math that has been coming out. And it's dealing mostly with information theory, that being like how digital information is stored, is transmitted, all that stuff. It really has to do with computers and the internet. And right now, the Internet of Things and how these AIs communicate on this either wired internet or wireless, whether Bluetooth, whether Wi-Fi, over long distances, 5G, all that shit, how these AIs are communicating and how they make decisions. So just put AI, conscious agent. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's where the math is coming from, and they're learning a lot how these things interact, how they make decisions. And I think that's really where the direction they're going in. And it makes a lot of sense because our world is totally becoming that.
One funny implication in the theory is that reality looks more like just like a social network.
Oh yeah.
And then an actual 3D space-time.
Yep.
With the hilarious part about that is to suggest that somehow, and maybe it's not so crazy because somehow our social media is more real than 3D space-time. Kind of makes sense because now we're just happy to integrate.
Yep. That's true. Yeah. So okay. So what is the meaning to life of life to you?
I have no idea. I don't know that one.
It's a great question. It's such a subjective question.
I guess I don't think there is.
Yes, I would agree with you. Like that would have been my answer. There is no meaning to life. Everyone makes their own meaning because it's subjective. It's your own conscious experience. And to me, it's like it's really like interactions between humans. You know, the time we spend together, whether it's through relationships or whether it's just through talking through friendships. To me, it's enjoying like good food, good drink, you know, like stuff like that, and just learning and just trying to understand more stuff. And it was interesting how they're mentioning that, you know, like, oh, reality may be more like a social network where these conscious agents are just interacting. And it makes a lot of sense. If that's closer to what reality actually is, like, it would make sense that the meaning of life is just interpersonal relationships.
Interrelations, yeah. It does seem like interrelations, at least interrelations create more. Remember sort of like the idea that communicating more leaves more things to be communicated almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like more interrelation allows for further more interrelation.
You're opening up the door to more possibility.
Which is, you know, it's really a funny analogy to that is that I'm pretty sure a pretty established idea lately about 3D space-time and quantum entanglement.
Yeah.
Is that quantum entanglement between particles in the universe stitches together 3D space-time. When you take simulations and you start de-entangling particles, 3D space-time goes with it.
Yeah, yeah.
And that to me sounds sort of like a particle social network.
Particle social network.
Yeah. I mean, the idea of particles making choices, that's another episode too.
Well, remember, those things aren't real. Those are just created. Space-time is created by our graphical user interface, by our whatever this is.
Particles being part of that, right? So particles, I've been thinking lately that like everybody talks about, you know, particles being waves and particles. And that theory. Like there's the, you know, wave probability that collapses, the wave function probability that collapses when you observe it. But the truth is nothing ever collapsed. It's just that you, in that moment, created your simulation for yourself.
And once you stop paying attention, particle. It's not there, yeah.
And then there's this notion that observation causes entanglement. And that's part of why as soon as we try to measure something, it shows as, you know, an actual particle. You know, I forget where I saw this, but it was.
It could be so these particles can be existing at different states. It could either be up or down. They have these weird different names, these different spins, but you can't predict it with certainty if you're not observing it. There's always a probability sphere of, oh, it might be this, it might be that, it might be here, it might be there. But once the measurement is taken, then it becomes.
We assume it becomes.
But that's the whole point. So yeah, we assume it becomes, and it's like, okay, so that's really weird. So,
it is weird as fuck.
but that's what Hoffman is saying is that, well, it's weird because your body is the one actually, your whatever is creating that. Space-time is created by you.
But at the same time, I do think there's an entanglement. So, you know, I mean, right. I mean, there's a lot of ground to continue trying to explore here, but I actually feel like I hadn't considered that there's actually correlation because, you know, let's say you observe something and that's what, you know, I'm observing the table and the table exists now because I'm observing it, because the wave function collapsed and now I can put stuff on it. But there's also this notion sort of that the table entangled itself with me as a table.
Makes sense. Yeah.
But that's in my perspective, but the framework still allows, or at least maybe not his, but Wolfram's framework allows, Wolfram will be another episode, for the table, which I'm experiencing it as a table because it's sort of entangled with me as a table. But that wave function probability is actually still even going and entangling sort of with other, let's say, conscious agents that we're not paying attention to because they're totally irrelevant to our survival and our enjoyment of, you know, whatever social media we're in. I feel like it's too soon for that one, but
so we have a lot of directions we can go in right now. Do you want to talk about, because this is obviously opening up the door to the spiritual realm. I don't know if you've ever had any experience with spirits or anything like that. We could also talk about psychedelics, which is another big thing.
Yeah, it definitely could be related.
Have you ever had any experiences with ghosts?
No, not really. There was one time there was an orb you could only see through a camera, but
That happened to you too? Because that happened to me.
I'm going to save my DMT trip for another episode.
Okay, so real quick, I was not on anything. I was completely sober. I was with my cousin, and we were actually in Japan, and it was this old temple in Ueno Park, and we're just in there. We're just tourists. My cousin's taking pictures. We've been taking pictures the whole trip, taking pictures, and it's just a really cool temple. And then that night, when we got back to the hotel, and we were just looking at the pictures, in this one particular place in the temple, there were all these orbs. They were all transparent. Some were more opaque than others. So some were really like gray, fuzzy, white, some deeper, some less so. And some were actually moving. Some were actually like where you see kind of these streaks, and some were just huge, some were small, and we just could not explain it. And it was mostly just inside of the temple, not really as much outside. And it wasn't rain, it wasn't dust, it wasn't anything like that. Because it didn't exist anywhere else in the pictures. And then later we found out that that wall at the temple, it was actually a wall with all the names of the people who have died at that temple. And this is like a centuries old.
Wow, that is odd.
And I'm not really like, I'm very skeptical of a lot of things. I don't really believe in spirits. I don't believe in God. I don't believe in this and I don't believe in that. I'm not saying it's not possible. I just don't believe in it. But that has always stumped me. I could never figure that shit out.
No, yeah, I went to a buddy's house one time and they had a little like flippy camera. Those old like sort of camcorders, and you opened it.
And this was a DSLR camera, by the way. It wasn't like some old dusty camera. It was like a nice camera that he's a photographer. He's been doing this for years.
I don't know how they could have done this, but you know, they're like, check this out. Like, there's this thing that lives here, and they open the camera, and we're in like his room. We're in his dusty ass room, and you don't see anything. It's just a room. But when you looked at it in the camera, there's an orb, and it was just moving around. And I mean, I didn't even know what to make of it. I was just like, and I mean, those were crazy times, you know. So I was just like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's like if it doesn't fit into your framework of reality, it's kind of hard to like, well, either I dismantle everything I know to accept this one fact, or I just ignore that fact.
Yeah, and I think it's easy for anybody to sort of hear Hoffman's work and be really, really, skeptical is good, but probably super dismissive. It's interesting that he's actually managed to develop like a mathematical framework for it and stuff. And I mean, I guess kind of this is a good segue into sort of this, you know, I wish there was more sort of like scholarly stuff on this idea, but just from personal observation and kind of thinking about Hoffman's work as well, the way that what we're doing is creating the sensory experience for ourselves in order to believe a certain thing that is going to give us the opportunity to survive. And, you know, generally speaking, depending on where you arbitrarily put the line is like, I've been feeling like really the brain almost all that it does, maybe at least like the sort of like conscious ego of the part of the brain, is lying to you.
Lying to you.
And I feel like putting it in that way is a little bit abrasive to people, because people don't want to believe that they're lying to themselves.
Definitely lying.
At least they don't want to believe that everything they think is a sort of lie, because lie seems like a strong word, but I kind of feel like it's appropriate, where it's like the brain is literally feeding you lie after lie that you happily accept because it just makes your life easy. Sometimes you realize, oh, I was wrong about that. Let me switch things up a little bit, and then good to go. I can continue living my life knowing every other truth about myself and about the society I live in. But what's that one thing? The noble lie about society. That everybody has to sort of tell themselves that in order for society to work, we have to sort of like be in agreement that this is going to work. Even though a lot of the time, and everybody agrees, it's not fucking working. But really, what other choice do we have?
I mean, that's a political conversation right there. We can get deep into that, but yeah, your brain is filling in the blanks because we're being bombarded with tons of sensory perception, whether it's visual, whether it's auditory. I don't know if you ever sat there and just like not thought of anything, and then you start listening to everything that's actually going on around you.
Sure.
Absolutely. And like a lot of time your brain just filters that out because it's not relevant for the moment.
But see, I love that you say fills in the gaps, as if you have the foundation, right? Like you have a foundation and there's just gaps and you fill them in. And it's like, I would take it further, and I would say that,
Let me put it this way.
The foundation is a lie.
But let's just for a moment assume, because I remember one time I was staring, I'm looking forward right now, and to my right outside of my view, not this far out, but like maybe about like 20 to 30 degrees out of my view of where I was pointing my eyes, there was a calendar. And I remember I was just thinking, and someone was talking to me. I was just staring off, thinking about something else. And then at the side of my view, I remember this calendar saying September. That's just what filled in my head, September. And then later on, like a minute later or something later, I went to look at the calendar again. It didn't say September. It said December. It said something else. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it just kind of struck me for a minute, but I could have sworn I saw it say September.
Yeah, I mean, optical illusions. I used to think I was cynical because it's easy for me to say absolutely every facet of every perceptual intake that you get, input, is a lie. I am perfectly okay with that. And I used to think that I was cynical. But I don't really think so anymore. Come here, buddy.
It's okay.
As much as, it's not that useful in your day-to-day life, maybe, to take it too far, to take it all the way, which, taking it all the way is essentially losing your sense of a unified self, almost practically a death, right? It's
nihilist. Like stagnation is death.
Right. If you take it all the way, it's like basically you just stop existing.
You're Donald Trump.
But I mean, I guess that's a good question, right? Because if I believe that really there's no foundation, the only foundation is a reality that we will never get to. Who would even ask this question? Because it's like we have this already, right? But I mean, if you can have the window, so it's like if Mario could, would he want to get out? I don't. A better analogy is Westworld, which I kind of wanted to use at some point.
Never saw it.
The first season was great. So it's like these androids, they live in a controlled world, and then the outside world pays to get to go in there and enjoy. Huge spoiler, but I mean, Westworld's like, I don't know, like 5 years old at this point.
Thanks.
Season 1 of Westworld, do you mind if I spoil it?
You're going to do it anyway. So.
At some point, one of the androids...
Why did he even ask me?
Manages to get out by seducing one of the humans. She's like this intelligent AI. So let's say Mario has this AI instilled in Mario.
Oh, when you said Mario, I thought you were talking about Mario the plumber.
That's what I'm talking about, Mario the plumber from Mario Brothers.
Okay.
And I'm just saying, like, if you put an AI in Mario, you know, it's like, would Mario, if Mario wanted to get out, how could he? You know? And I think seducing one of us would be the way to do it, which is what happened in Westworld. One of the androids kind of slowly found out that she was an android and she was being controlled and manipulated by these sort of like gods on the outside, and found a way to seduce one of them into helping her get out. She goes into the real world, which is, you know, the present day, which is like, I think not to the degree to which we are separated from the reality that might be out there to be found in this case here, which is the real reality. Then again, we'll never know. We'll never know if we're going to come bursting out of a matrix bubble at any second. But I don't really believe that. I think it's self-simulated. And I think, I guess just like the underlying reality is probably as boring as a circuit board. Which there's this one sort of like hypergeometric object in physics that it makes me like think about, which also reminded me of you comparing like the cells in the body, because when you're thinking about a video game too, there's hardware and software. So like when you're thinking about like Mario, Super Mario Brothers, like you know, the hardware is the circuit board, that's the hardware reality, and then there's a software reality written onto the circuit board, which is creating the sensory experience. So presumably, if we take that analogy and keep it going to us, there's, let's say, a hardware reality, which might be the boring circuit board. And then there's a software reality, which might be a little more interesting, which is the sensory experience. And there's an object in physics. It's called the CFT ADS. It's a very weird notion that there's this sort of, you know, I think it splits up quantum hologram, like quantum holography, and sort of like gravity as the hardware. And I'm speaking really, really loosely here. You have sort of this like gravitational hardware geometry, and then through that there's this projected quantum hologram, which through these quasi-particles, which another episode, quasi-particle is basically a simulated particle, a particle that's not a particle that we call a particle, but there's certain particles that only exist under very specific conditions. Groups of things act like one thing, so we call it a quasi-particle. We're like, we don't know why this is acting like one thing, but you know, to our eyes, we don't see a particle. We just see different things that shouldn't be acting together, but they are. So
Gotcha.
For all intents and purposes, this is a particle, but it's not an actual thing. So it's a quasi-particle. So, so you have this gravitational geometric object kind of undulating through space with this quantum hologram kind of going through it. And then within it, there's this notion of a quasi-crystal, which allows basically sort of like the crystallization of perceptual experiences. And because, you know, the weird way that quantum works, like there's a potential for like multiple sensory experiences to sort of like be able to exist in all the nested dimensions of the whole thing.
I think we're going into the weeds here.
Yeah. Those are rough. I'm going to go way deeper into all of the things that I just said in other episodes, because these are all really, really fleshed out things. At least the ideas of them. The application is like just too far from being useful. But the idea of all these things is pretty fleshed out. There's math that describes it. And so, I mean, you know, that's just like, even that though is a projection of like, you know, what the very smartest people are trying to say reality might be. But podcast burp. But yeah, so
Since you-
circuit board boring, software, sensory experience, maybe a little bit more interesting.
You keep saying circuit boards are boring. I don't find them boring.
I guess to me they are.
Well, you mentioned Westworld. I've never seen Westworld, but have you ever seen Ghost in the Shell, the original movie?
Yes.
So if you remember, it's a world for anyone who doesn't know. It's these cyborgs, and you have humans, but a lot of humans already have these different parts already built in for, like, not real human parts, but they're machine, they're cyborgs, and to the point where the main character, Major Kusanagi, she is basically completely cyborg, minus what's left of her conscious agent. Let's call it. They call it the ghost in the shell. The ghost being the spirit. Let's just call it her conscious agent is the last thing that's really human about her. Everything else is, she has her memory, she's this and that, but everything else is not human. Let's call it that. And this is an interesting world that definitely made me think of this as I was listening to the Hoffman interview, because in the movie, there is this AI consciousness it's some experiment from some deep government agency, and basically an AI that's being used to sift through the sea of information that is the internet, that is the connected world of information. Eventually, a consciousness emerged out of it. It's not human, but he calls himself human. And for some reason, he can see the major, the main character, and he wants nothing but to mate with her. But it's an AI. He takes the form of a cyborg's body, but he's an AI. How can he mate? And his whole thing is that, like I'm a living sentient being. I can't really say I'm human, but like I feel like I'm human, and all I really want to do is to do things that I can't do, which are procreate and die. So cut it short to the end, eventually they merge consciousness and they become one conscious. They're still the same person, but they're a new person. It's just really weird. They're two conscious agents coming together to form a new conscious agent.
Right.
And that's not in the movie, but in the manga, it kind of implies that there is this world where they can speak without being physically present. There's this world, where they can communicate, they can see each other in a different way, and that's where they're merging. And to me, that reminded me of that conscious, what reality might really be is where these conscious agents interact and move around in this network.
Yeah, this weird social network of nested conscious agents, like this Russian doll situation.
Yeah, and that's from like the 90s. This very interesting movie, comic, later movie, later episodes, and they're always going on this idea of false memories. Very interesting.
I don't know if we'll go deeper into it in another episode, but that is really, really related to this very new thing. Have you heard of these Xenobots? It was like in the news for a little bit very recently. There's this bioengineer guy. He took skin cells from a frog fetus, and he removed them from the organism and grew them, I guess, in the environment that he had in the lab. And these skin cells actually sort of took on an independent selfhood. The skin cells actually, instead of needing the organism that they were born to, they kind of became what kind of is like this like little cancerous tumor in this little ball. And then the little hairs that would have been on the skin grew all around it, and they call them Xenobots, and they survived and behaved for a certain amount of time. The weird thing about that is that the skin kind of just was able to be independent.
Yeah, like you cut off a piece of skin that we think is just, it's not really conscious. And then suddenly it's making these decisions.
Exactly. It started behaving. It started moving around and turning around and moving in random ways. So that reminded me of what you were saying, because some of the implications of that, which, like I said, we'll go deeper into that in another episode, but an implication that that professor was talking about was that we have this idea of the unified self, that we are a body and we are a selfhood, but really it's difficult to make a boundary between the different parts of you, and for that matter where you end and where the environment begins, because
that's a Radiohead lyric,
right?
Where you end and I be.
I mean, he was talking about memories, because somebody asked him, I forget what they asked him, but he was saying that, if you began sharing your memories with another person,
mm-hmm.
you would have a difficult time telling who you are.
Right.
If you just suddenly started having overlapping memories with another conscious agent, you would become very not confused, but for all intents, I mean, who knows? You might be just okay with it. But you would lose track of just who you were before.
Your identity. Yeah, like your identity is tied to your memories.
Oh, a wonderful example Hoffman uses is that if there's been surgeries, because people that are epileptic, they cut the corpus callosum,
mm-hmm. separating the left from the right brain,
and it helps with the epilepsy. But then what happens is that the two sides of the self suddenly become more independent, and they can disagree.
Mm-hmm.
The left side of, maybe the body and the brain decision-making processes,
they'll disagree on what they see or yeah.
Yeah. They'll disagree on little things like what they see or what they feel like. And that's just one blatant example of how we are a plurality of conscious agents without really being too aware of it.
Yeah, and that's really old studies. I remember learning that in school, and it was always one of those weird things. That was back when that we used to actually experiment on humans and and do lobotomies and stuff. Now we just experiment on dogs, but it's really interesting.
So I kind of wanted to explain all of that to this is something that I saw recently, which kind of really messed with me, and also the question of memory. Right, where's memory written? We've have this assumption that memory lives in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow we have some RAM or some, memory in our brain where once we have a memory, it gets written in. So check this out. When people get an organ transplant, especially a major organ, they begin having memories of the other person's.
That's weird.
They begin, so some examples are, it could be, and it's difficult to test, because people might not be sharing exactly what they're going through, and if they do bring it up, maybe it wasn't really recorded. But now that we've been doing this for quite a while, there's some reported cases, and when somebody gets a new organ from the donor, there's coincidences. There will be sensations that the person has that they've never had before. Or they'll have a desire for something that they've never wanted before. And those things happen to be correlated with the donor. I'll put one of those interviews in the description as well. And that just messed with me, because it made me think, well, where does memory live?
It makes sense, so if we assume neurons are what's sending all these electrical signals throughout the body and making ourselves work. Your senses are tied to your memories. Have you ever smelled something and you had suddenly a memory, or you heard something and that person's voice reminds me of something?
Yep.
Or you're in a certain location. These and I can't remember the experiments in the moment, but there have been experiments that show that spatial location encoded in the brain is definitely tied to memory. And these neurons are turning on at the same time as these memories are being, either encoded or retrieved. I can't. I wish I had the information in front of me. But yeah, these things are definitely correlated in some way.
Yeah, I mean, and the Xenobot guy, another, he was. It's funny how much he stressed that this sort of arbitrary boundary that we make in ourselves and in the world, it becomes getting blurry. And he was like, people think that neurons are this special thing in the brain that like is serving this very specific purpose, but the truth is, every cell in the body has the same capability as the neuron. The neuron's faster.
That's a Levine guy, right?
Yes, Michael.
I started listening to it. It was very interesting.
Yeah, I'll post some of his stuff too, in case anybody wants to go in any of these rabbit holes. But, so every cell in the body has an electrical conductance to it, and so does the neuron, and that's what the neuron uses to communicate, and that's what every cell in the body uses to communicate. The neurons are fast; they're much faster. They've got the myelin sheaths.
They're specialized for that.
Yeah, they are specialized for that, but it kind of seems as though memory is not localized to the brain. Memory seems, if you're kind of thinking about these weird organ transplant people and how they're even specific memories. Oh, I remember one now. Someone got a major organ. I don't know if it was their heart or some sort of like liver or something of someone who was murdered. And the person who received the organ could actually see the murderer's face.
Holy shit.
In their memory.
That's some bad dreams right there.
Yeah. They must have been, they took the person's organ that got murdered. So, they probably really needed that organ.
Yes.
Came at a price. But they're probably willing to pay it. But that's a weird notion that memory might be encoded. It made me understand memory, I feel like, more in that, I used to think, memory is almost like a video image in my brain, but that didn't really make any sense. But now I kind of see that, like, a memory is almost like the organs have this sensory memory, which, there's instinct. Instinct is a memory without actually... It's just organ memory.
Yeah.
It's like organs have this capability of a memory.
One thing I'm really good at is people's voices. And I'll hear a voice and I'll know exactly who it is. Like, I'm not 100%, but like 99% I'm really good at, like, if I were to hear your voice on the phone, some people are like, who the fuck is that? I have no idea who it is. I instantly know it's you. I instantly know it's someone else. And for some reason, that's just something I'm good at, is... Like, I encode people's... It's specifically people. Like, maybe I'm a musician and, I'm good with sound, but I think it specifically has to do with people because we're humans. We're tuned to hearing other humans. For some reason, I'm just really good at that. It's really weird.
So I guess now that we've roughly sort of, like, gone through the ideas of the things that... the topics we wanted to bring up. I guess let me see if maybe now, I guess just have fun.
Well, I did want to talk a little more about Hoffman.
Okay, let's do it.
And so it's interesting because, okay, so his whole thing was, yes, he was going with a very radical notion. But he specifically said himself that was, okay, so I'm trying to convince my peers, these people I respect, these people I work with, these scientists who believe more in, who assume materialism in their stuff, like, none of them can explain to me, their theories can't explain what the taste of chocolate is, or what the taste, or why is that different than the taste of garlic. Like, that's a conscious experience. That's something that's subjective. No objective theory can really explain it. Like, why humans, feel that, see that way. So, but so his whole thing was, okay, so I'm going to go with one of your assumptions. I'm gonna create a conscious theory that assumes evolution, the theory of natural selection, is correct. And that's why this thing works so well with, okay, fitness payoffs, and this is tuned specifically to have it survive because he did it that way. He said himself, like, this, I was working with that assumption. Not necessarily right, but that's the assumption. So to me, that is really interesting because, and you kind of mentioned earlier, like, how do we define winning? Like, because in evolution, it's not necessarily like, the strongest survive, but it's like whoever is most tuned to surviving that one environment at that time is going to be the one that survives.
Who's the better liar to themselves?
True, I guess you could say that. And then there's another another way that, okay, so this is my point. Sorry. So what is the point of winning then? What is survival? Is it just to spread your genes?
So, that's definitely a tough one, and I think where I've ended up with that is there's this French psychoanalyst, Jaques Lacan, and his big thing is
I studied Lacan a lot in college.
His big thing is desire, and I think desire itself has a big implication to what's real, which Lacan's the real. Is an absolute like analogy to Hoffman's, because Lacan's real is an inaccessible space. The real that Lacan refers to is the real that we can't see, and Lacan puts this sort of horror twist to it, because the real is that thing that we can never experience except through an ecstatic like moment of pain and pleasure, where, because if we knew the real, it would be too much,
Yeah, I gotcha.
When you take too much when you take too much of anything and you're just like, way too deep in whatever.
Yeah, that's forbidden knowledge.
And sometimes you don't make it back. But that real, is sort of, and so Lacan puts a lot of emphasis on desire, and I like a lot of the other things Lacan sort of like talks about, and so I think there is an importance there, because when it comes to like sex, which is the gateway to a new conscious agent, which clearly has something to do with the real, with the reality we can't access. The cycle of birth is so far. I try to look into pregnancy once, just because I'm left-handed, and then I try to go in a rabbit hole about left-handedness, because only like 1 in 10 people are left-handed.
My mom was left-handed.
I tried to go in this rabbit hole of left-handedness, and I ended up like at pregnancies and vanishing twin syndrome, which is very weird, because it's like a lot of people might have actually been a twin in the womb and not know it, because they absorbed their twin so early.
Yeah.
And we don't know how many of those happened, because the twin could be absorbed so quickly that there's no way of being so invasive into like, measuring if that's the case. So we don't know how many people actually started as twins and absorb the twin. So I think there's like this notion about left-handedness. Traditionally, left-handedness is the left-handed path. God only creates with his right hand. So there's this sort of stigma, historically speaking, about left-handed people. And they used to say that the left-handed person ate their twin in the womb. And the thing is, there's some truth to that, because in some of those twin pregnancies, a lot of the time, one of them is absorbing the other, or the mother absorbs one of them. They'll end up being mirrored twins, which means that one of them is right-handed, one of them is left-handed. And so if the left-handed one absorbs, that is actually one way you get a left-handed person. And then if you're left-handed, genetically speaking, your children are more predisposed. So what was that point that I was bringing that up for?
You tell me.
What was the last thing that you mentioned?
I don't remember. But I have do have other things I want to mention.
Wait. Let me see if I can just finish this, because so the left-handedness. Damn it! I was really getting to a point with that. Pregnancy. We don't know shit about pregnancy. We don't know about like our bodily processes that I feel like. But now I don't know why I was bringing that up.
So on the topic of pregnancy.
No.
So you said that procreation is how new conscious agents emerge.
Right. So sex and pregnancy have this connection to the real, presumably, because that's how we're making new conscious agents, right? And then a big aspect to that is desire. The desire to and sex itself is sort of two conscious agents, coming together. You get a new one. So, just in trying to grasp at what might be real, it seems like I think sex is an important thing. And then I think desire follows very closely there. I don't know which one might be more important. I mean, they seem to be both extremely important. So I think desire has something to do with the real. So it's like, what is winning? I think winning is almost the ability to continue desiring, right? Because you want to keep desiring. If you fulfill your desire and then that's it, it's almost like that's not winning. Like, and that's why I feel like there's an obsession with money and people think that making money is winning, and that doesn't seem to be it, because I feel like money is the type of thing where it's like, okay, you want it, you get it, and then it leaves you little room to continue desiring things. And so I feel like you can convince yourself, I guess, that you've won in some capacity. But I think winning, I guess, has more to do, or, I don't like that word so much, because that is I feel like a way that it's framed in a certain way. But I think, I guess, at least for me, being able to continue desiring, I think, is an important part of I guess, winning.
Well, should I respond to that, or should I go to pregnancy?
No, whatever you want.
Tell me.
Respond.
Okay, so, it's evolution we're talking about. So is it necessarily the self, or is it the community? Is it, because, okay, so in order for one person to survive, like, and I'm not talking about right now, I'm not talking about 2022, I'm talking about 20, right? or maybe before that. Like, in order for one person to survive, you're more likely to survive in a group of people rather than just you by yourself. Just one person trying to get the food, trying to have shelter, trying to survive the elements, trying to survive other animals, whether they're kind or not. More than likely, you will survive better in a group.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons why interpersonal relationships, it's my opinion, is so important, because, well, we have to be able to communicate. We have to be able to agree or even convince each other and come to an agreement enough, as you mentioned earlier, society, this thing does have to work at some extent, because we're able to do more when we come together and achieve. And some person might be better at fishing, some person might be better at cooking, or if we need 5 of us to take down that woolly mammoth, we work together. And this is why language evolved, because we were able to, even before words, we were able to express these, like either like whether like this or that, or you could see anger on a person's faces and that. But eventually language evolved from that, just making utterances. So I'm losing my point now. Fuck. Well, so that's the whole thing. So to me, winning is not necessarily spreading your genes, because people do want to spread their genes and this and that, or for survival. But it's also a matter of culture. Evolution through natural selection still happens through culture, through passing down ideas, knowledge. Like, to me, you don't necessarily have to have kids in order to benefit the society you live in.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying it's not about genes, but it's just about desire. Being able to continue to desire.
Yeah, and as I find it really interesting that you mentioned that, because your desire could be for knowledge, for making something better for your community. In Hoffman's case, I wonder if Hoffman's ever had kids. I was going to ask you, do you think Hoffman is winning?
I think he's enjoying himself. Yeah. No, he seems to really be enjoying himself. And I heard a more recent interview. He's got lofty goals. I mean, he's taking classes with this one physicist who, before Hoffman, has been talking about the sort of, they call it space-time is doomed. And it has to do with these really high dimensional geometries, which you can sort of map these like physics that used to take like hundreds of sheets of paper in this one traditional method. If you instead take this hyperdimensional geometrical object and map the like sort of qualities of the physics reaction onto this geometric object, you can actually come up with conclusions far easier than if you use the traditional method. And it seemed to suggest that space-time is not so fundamental before Hoffman. And now that Hoffman is kind of finding his own thing, suggesting that space-time is not fundamental, he's actually taking classes with this physicist to try and understand how to build these geometries and incorporate his conscious agent framework into these geometries, because his goal is because he's aware that his claim that consciousness being fundamental means that you have to be able to rebuild physics from it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's what he's really trying to do.
Yeah. Your theory is not going to work if everything else that we do know that works doesn't somehow fit into this new framework.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if he's claiming it to be fundamental,
it's got
then it has to be able to rebuild what we call our own fundamental.
Yeah, the already science that we already have down packed.
Yeah. So I think he's enjoying himself. He has these lofty goals to try and make these incredibly interesting discoveries. There's a lot of incredibly interesting discoveries. They're really complicated, and they all seem to be related. And that's why I really want to have these conversations, because it's interesting.
And then to bring it back to conscious agents, the creation of new conscious agents, and pregnancy and conception. At what point does a new conscious agent emerge?
That is well. The thing is, we can be pretty sure calling a person a conscious agent, but we're also pretty sure animals are conscious agents. We're also fairly certain plants are pretty conscious, and funguses are pretty sophisticated. Bacteria, single cell organisms, stuff like that. Maybe we're not so sure. Viruses, we're not even sure if they're alive. And then like rocks, we're pretty certain there's no consciousness there. But so when you're in biology, it's pretty easy. You can say something's conscious or something's not conscious pretty easily. But Wolfram's framework actually goes so far as to sort of take inanimate objects, and even Hoffman's, right? Like Hoffman is suggesting that whatever consciousness a rock may have is just irrelevant to us. It may exist in a totally, totally different quantum sensory crystallization of experiential existence, which Wolfram's system allows for it, but man, that would be a whole other thing to get into. But
the reason why I bring it up, because I don't want to get into the weeds of it, but obviously it's been a huge debate forever for our society, whether, life begins at conception, life begins at birth. Is it 3 weeks in? Is it when the brain starts having signals? Is it when the heart starts having signals? At what point is a baby alive? And then and the whole implication for that is that when is it okay to abort the baby or whatever? And it's just so interesting that this is such an important topic for people. It is. I mean, people have their different beliefs, whether they're religious or not, whatever you want to call it. I'm not trying to get into that. But the fact is that we're talking about the creation of a new conscious agent.
Yeah, but the thing is, I guess where I'm coming from with it is like, I'm not going to sit here and be like, well, a rock and a baby are somehow at an equal stature.
No.
Because of course, like, I can't do that. But I will say that I think, the line we draw as to where a baby becomes conscious has less to do with actually how conscious it is and more about our collective trauma with death, because I think it's just about like our story as humans is, to not let the baby die.
Yeah.
And so,
no, for sure.
And so where we draw that line, I think, is mostly political.
But it's also an evolutionary thing.
It depends on the times.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. But I think it's also an evolutionary thing, because if babies are the most vulnerable and the ones that will, continue the generations, for some reason we try to protect them for whatever reason.
That'll be a good conversation for the young episode, because I think there's plenty there, because Jung's archetypes kind of, I think, are more of an imprint on the human awakening, and I think that will speak a lot to our need to hold the child as the most sacred thing, because we have to, or we, at least in the wild, we had to, in order to not let ourselves, if all the babies get eaten, there's going to be nothing left. So I think that's a consequence of that, and I think the young episode will be really good for that.
And then even if we apply it to plants, like, does a new conscious agent emerge when the bee first pollinates a flower? Is it when the seedling first emerges from its seed? It'd be interesting to see if how these theories evolve and what answers they bring, because I mean, these are important questions for human society.
Yeah, plenty more questions and answers that they'll bring.
Yes, of course. Did you have any other points that you wanted to make?
Man, I don't think so. I think we got through that pretty rough, but I hope at least that we could pique anybody's interest in Hoffman's work, because I think, as we continue recording new conversations, the themes will come back up, and I want to weave them in with other ideas so that they all kind of like start painting a picture.
Okay, I like that. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else. I mean, other than why are our realities synced? That's still a question for me. That's a little tough.
Yeah, that one is interesting, and I think that's why I was bringing up the notion that entanglement and observation seems to be related.
Okay, I see. What you're saying.
So it's almost like by observing one another and observing an object, like you said, it's like particles, they're inanimate, presumably, but by measuring them, they decide where to be. You try to measure it, it makes a decision suddenly, right? Yeah. It's like a good explanation for that is that really what's happening is you're becoming entangled with the particle. So now, you've created this simulation for yourself that the particle, and I think the entanglement might be the simulation. I mean, of course, that's just an idea, but an intuition may be that the simulation may be even facilitated by entanglement. Your entanglement with particles, but I think that still leaves room, because since the simulation is yours, You know, I wonder if particles can be entangled in multiple ways at once. That almost feels like it defeats the purpose. So let's not go there. But yeah, I think
it's really weird. Like you were saying, like this theory has to be able to explain this stuff that we know already works, but we're just looking at it wrong.
yeah. But the shared reality, it also could have to do with the circuit board. You know, there's
Like maybe so even though you create space time when you observe or when you this and that, maybe somehow your space time and my space time on some fundamental level sync, so that we can sync our realities and both agree that's a table. That is a brown table.
yeah, we can put stuff on it. At least we both agree that there's something, because right, there's the funny question of, well, is your red the same as my red? We can't actually know that, but we can both agree that there's a color there that we can both, in a more simpler way, there's something there where we can put a cup, or there's something there where we can put the thing that holds the thing we drink.
Yeah.
We both know that at least there's something there that's going to hold the thing that holds the thing that we drink. So, you know, breaking it down like that.
There has to be that fundamental level of agreement, or else we wouldn't be able to communicate.
But funnily enough, we don't know if we're actually seeing the same table.
And then just last thing, one thing I thought was really interesting that they mentioned was synesthesia. And that's a phenomenon that we all know exists. I would hope that some people see colors, they taste colors, they hear colors. Like I know some musicians who an A minor to them is like a weird color of red with purple, and not just the color, but it'll appear in different parts of their view. It'll be up here, over there.
Yeah, synesthesia might be an easy example, because I think senses could go even further. I mean, something Hoffman mentions is that the framework allows for an infinite amount of sensory modalities. That's not just like, you know, extra senses. That's entirely different modalities of how they're organized. And in a way, like if you think about an organ, you know, its perceptual sensory modality is nothing like your your whole self. You have all your 5 senses, which give you like this really nice flowing experience of reality. But like your kidneys, presumably they have feelings, you know. When their kidneys are hurting, I'm hurting sometimes. My kidneys might act up on me and I'll be like, holy crap.
Old man. What are you, 45?
But I'm a little hard on my kidneys. But that sensory modality, we'll never know what that's like to be a kidney. Even though the kidney's inside us and we feel it, we'll never know what it's like to be a kidney. And of course, you know, animals have different senses than us. A dog can smell a seizure. You know, bees can see more colors, presumably. They can see further into the violet, so can birds. You know, birds see flowers in a completely different way. And I mean, you can take that, by Hoffman's framework, you can take that so far as to be like there's things existing in the same space that we are in that have nothing to do with the sensory modality that we use. And so we just don't care. We don't see it. There's no need to. But there could be way more all around us than we even know.
Yeah, and there is space in physics for that. There's I think it's I can't remember the name. Non-baronic matter. It's just matter that does not interact with light. So light just passes right through it, like it's not even there.
Or at least, you know, we're measuring something like that, and that's how like we explain it.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say. It's like we assume that like light interacts with everything, and like light, like that's how we see. We see light, and things reflecting off of light. And then our brain, you know, does some craziness. And
I don't think I've ever thought about that. That's an interesting notion of
something
like,
that
where
doesn't
light.
If something doesn't ever reflect off light, then how do we see it other than with our instruments?
Because the thing is, light's a different thing, right? It's like 'cause light,
photons. It's a wave. It's a particle. It's a wave particle.
More like, I don't know. I have no idea how to conceptualize that in at least this framework we're talking about. Because of course, yes, there's photons, there's particles, there's the speed of light, there's all these things. But the thing is like light actually doesn't have speed. Light freezes time. That's what it does. It's always going the same speed, no matter what the reference frame is. So it almost seems more like what light is doing is, it's like it almost feels like a rip or something in a space time, because it's slowing. Time slows to light. If you're going the speed of light, time is frozen. This is just like a black hole, or just like high gravity slows time down. It almost feels like it's a rip in space-time, but I don't know. I don't know where that leads, though. I have no idea. I need to think about that. That'll be great for another one. That'll be great for a later one. I'm gonna really think about that, and I'm gonna see where in Hoffman's work light fits.
I think he mentions it at some point. I can't remember too much.
I gotta see.
Anyway, It's getting late, and I think we've racked our brains to the limit at this point.
Yeah, let's call it. That was a nice introductory conversation on the rest of everything that we'll go into.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. This is Chimp and John.
Signing off.